When we focus into the coming events, Copa do Mundo 2014, 2 years from now, and the Olympics 2016. When it comes to preparation of Rio, is Brazil in time, on schedule?
It's clearly challenging at this point. The airports are, somewhat delayed, I think, in terms of the expectations of where the infrastructure needs to be. There is certainly a lot of private money interested in investing in those projects, so there's a big opportunity for investment and there's a lot of available money. The question is the regulatory environment, the government funds that are investing as well, some of the crowding out of the private money, whether that money is actually going to be able to be invested efficiently in time to build the infrastructure that they need. So it's looking a little tight.
What needs to be done for now in order to get in time?
Well, there is a lot of building that needs to happen, both for the airport in Rio and in Sao Paulo, roads, et cetera. And really, the government needs to approve plans and bring in private investors to get building happening as quickly as possible. There are going to be a series of announcements starting, I guess tomorrow. President Dilma is going to make some announcements about roads and other infrastructure and more airport infrastructure too in the coming weeks. But it's a bit late. Again, the events are coming up quite soon. So there's concern that what's happened up until now is coming, somewhat late. Last year they approved the privatization and money coming into the Sao Paulo airport and a number of other airports around the country, but the question is to just how quickly that's all going to be implemented. It takes a long time to build that infrastructure.
Is there enough investment reserved for these coming events?
Access to money is absolutely not the problem. I think in some ways the problem is there's too much money because you have, again, both international private sector investors very anxious to build infrastructure in Brazil. You have local private investors competing with member firms, for example, of ours. Big private equity firms here in Brazil have raised infrastructure funds to develop just this kind of project. But you also have a lot of money from the government. So BNDES, the Brazilian Development Bank, and the Brazilian pension funds are all actively participating in these infrastructure projects. And so far, we haven't seen a lot of successful implementation of public-private partnerships for building that infrastructure. For example, last year, again, as I was mentioning, they had a competition for the privatization of the Sao Paulo airport. There were many private equity firms competing for that as well as other private investors, and ultimately a higher price was bid by the Brazilian pension funds that won that project. So I think that there's a certain tension between the government money and the private sector money, and hopefully that will be resolved in time to get projects completed.
I think the interesting aspect of this is that we can put together specific funds and then raise money.
When it comes to investment and good infrastructure, it's not only focused on the Copa do Mundo in 2014, but it also still has to be there in a good shape 2 years later for the Olympics.
This is a huge opportunity and a need for Brazil, well beyond these events. Much of the investment that we see from LAVCA, from private equity funds, is actually for domestic consumption. So a sector where we've seen an enormous amount of activity is in logistics and distribution. And if you think of supermarkets or fast food businesses, all of those foods need to be moved around in cold containers, and they need roads and they need ports for food coming in and out. There are a lot of sectors domestically that are influenced by the infrastructure. So we see all of this money coming in for a broad range of sectors in development, but it all depends on having the infrastructure in place. And so that's why, well beyond building the stadiums and the type of infrastructure you need specifically for these events coming up, there's a big need and opportunity to build, for example, water projects. Housing is expanding very, very quickly in Brazil, and housing also requires sanitation and all kinds of the telecommunications infrastructure. Try to get a mobile signal in Brazil. There are a lot of competitors there, but apparently they haven't been investing enough. So there's a huge need well beyond these events, and I think the events will be a good opportunity to set goals for the Brazilian government and for investors to get that infrastructure going.